Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, across the nation and around the world. You're listening once again to the Hour of the Time. And what an hour this is going to be, followed by another hour. How about that? Our guest tonight, ladies and gentlemen, is Michael Cremo. And I'm not sure if you pronounce that Cremo or Cremo. We'll find out in just a few minutes. He's a truth in science advocate. He's a long-time ardent critic, and I might add very a real critic of how scientists have abused their position and power. Michael Cremo is a member of the History of Science Society, the American Anthropological Association, and a research associate with the Bhaktivedanta Institute, specializing in the history and philosophy of science. His persistent investigation during the 8 years of writing the internationally acclaimed book, Forbidden Archaeology, has documented a major scientific screw-up, in my estimation. He is an international authority on archaeological anomalies. He is considered a leading authority on anomalous archaeological evidence relating to the antiquity of the human race. And I think you're going to be very surprised with some of the things he's going to reveal to you that the establishment of archaeologists have been hiding from the people of the world. He has a reputation for exposing major scientific cover-ups in the field of archaeology. Michael Cremo has enlivened audiences around the world on this fascinating subject as the author of the highly controversial book, Forbidden Archaeology, and several other volumes, one of which is along exactly the same lines. He is an internationally sought-after speaker and media guest. Most recently, he was a featured guest on the controversial national broadcast of Communists primetime special hosted by Charlton Heston entitled The Mysterious Origins of Man. Michael Cremo, welcome to the Hour of the Time.
Thank you, Bill.
Would you like to start off and just sort of give our listening audience your standard introduction into what it is that you've been doing and why it's so important?
Yes. If you were to look at archaeology as a big museum, what you'd find is that the public is only let into one small room of that museum, and on display there you'd see only the artifacts and skeletons, the stones and bones that go along with the orthodox scientific idea today, which is that human beings like ourselves have only been around for about 100,000 years or so, and before that there would have been only more ape-like creatures, ape men of various kinds, and before that apes and monkeys. But what most people don't realize is there are other rooms to that Museum of Archaeology, other rooms with locks on the doors. So what I've tried to do in my work is to take the locks off of those doors, those hidden rooms in the big Museum of Archaeology, and let people in to see what's there. And what you find is that over the past 150 years or so, scientists have found abundant evidence, massive amounts of evidence, showing that human beings like ourselves have been on this planet for literally millions of years, tens of millions, perhaps hundreds of millions of years. And of course this blows out of the water most of the theories that have been presented to us over the past 100 years or so. The Darwinian theory of evolution in particular, it completely contradicts that theory, because we find that there isn't any evidence that human beings evolved from apes or ape men. Rather, it appears we've coexisted with these creatures for vast periods of time on this planet. So, of course, people will ask, well, why, if so much of this evidence is there, why don't we hear about it? And that's because it's been suppressed by what I call a process of knowledge filtration. If you have these facts that go against the established theories, then people just don't hear about them. And I hope we'll get a chance to talk about a lot of these cases this evening with your audience.
Oh, well, I certainly am looking forward to it, Michael. I heard you on the Art Bell broadcast one night a few weeks ago, and I was absolutely appalled that the only interest Art Bell had was in trying to somehow coerce you into saying that all of this stuff means that we had been visited by some alien species from some other planet, and you were not able to do that. And so tonight we're going to give you all the time that you want to talk about all of these things, and I am extremely interested in what you have to say. Whatever in the world got you interested in this? Because I never would have thought to question a scientific venue like archaeology. I would never believe that archaeologists would be hiding things from us.
Well, that's a very good question, Bill, and I think you're right. Most people, they wouldn't have any reason to suspect that anything was wrong. Now you mentioned in the introduction that I'm a member of the Bhaktivedanta Institute, and that's the science studies branch of a Hindu-based organization called the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And my involvement with that organization led me about 25 years ago to begin some very intense study of the ancient writings of various civilizations, in particular the ancient Sanskrit writings of India. And among those writings I found a very interesting group called the Puranas, or the histories. And these Puranas, they talked about the existence of human civilizations on this planet going back into the very, very dimmest regions of time, tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of years into the past. And I began to notice that the writings of other ancient civilizations, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Chinese, the Mayan and Incan civilizations of the New World, they all seem to give a vastly longer period of time to human history than does modern science. So I thought, well, if there's such an agreement among all of these different wisdom traditions in the world that human beings do have a vastly longer period of history than modern science has, then perhaps there might be some physical evidence to back up what these ancient sources were saying. Now, I had been aware of one or two interesting little anomalies that I had encountered in my studies of the history of archaeology, and I thought, well, perhaps if I spend a few more weeks digging into this, I might be able to turn up a few more examples, and maybe I'd write a little pamphlet or a small book about it and go on to something else. But when I started looking into things, when I started looking into the entire history of archaeology over the past 150 years or so, I was really quite shocked to find that these archaeologists have literally buried almost as much evidence as they've taken out of the ground. In other words, they've discovered massive amounts of evidence showing that human beings have been present on Earth for millions of years, just as these ancient sources had said. So that's what really got me into it. If I hadn't been involved in some of these studies of ancient writings of different civilizations, particularly the ancient writings of India, I probably wouldn't have thought to question the ideas that I had been taught in school. What most people are taught in school today, most of what you see presented in these science specials on television like Nova and the National Geographic science specials, I wouldn't have thought to question the exhibits that you see in your local museum of natural history. They always have these very interesting little displays of the very little monkey that grows up and becomes the little ape man, and then finally you get the human being like ourselves. I wouldn't have thought to question any of that, perhaps, without having taken the time to look at things from a different perspective.
The only thing that ever caused me to wonder, and I didn't wonder very long really, was in my own research in the ancient culture of the Egyptians. I discovered that the Egyptians have never claimed to have built the Sphinx. Instead, you read that it was always there, and they were always preserving it and repainting it and taking care of it, but they had no idea who had built the Sphinx, and that made me stop and wonder. And of course I had read some of the Vedas and some of the Indian texts, and they talked about ancient civilizations that had a pretty advanced technology from what I could gather. But you could also attribute those kinds of things if you wanted to, and I chose